They found the officer on the brink of death. What the twin girls and their dog did next would shock the entire police force. It was a moment of desperation, one that would become a story defying all expectations, when two little girls and their faithful canine companion crossed paths with a wounded officer under circumstances no one could have foreseen. The biting autumn wind swept through red leaf forest, rattling the branches of trees already ablaze in shades of orange and red. Clara and Helena Almeida walked a familiar trail, their boots sinking into the damp leaves, while Thor, the German shepherd they had rescued the previous summer, trotted a few yards ahead, sniffing the air with excitement. "We should head back before it gets dark," suggested Clara, always the more cautious of the twins, adjusting the small backpack on her shoulders. At 10 years old, she carried her inseparable notebook, titled The Red Leaf Mystery, where she jotted down every interesting detail from their explorations. Helena was about to reply when Thor stopped abruptly, his ears perked and alert. The dog began to bark frantically, darting off the main path. "Something's wrong," Helena murmured, a chill running down her spine. The sisters exchanged a worried glance before following their dog through the underbrush and over fallen branches. That's when they stumbled upon something wholly unexpected. Beneath the shadow of a towering red maple, a uniformed man lay motionless, a dark pool spreading around him. The badge on his chest caught a stray sunbeam. It was Officer André Rocha, one of the most well-known policemen in Maple Valley. "Is he—" Helena couldn't finish the sentence, fear freezing the words in her throat. Clara approached cautiously, noting the shattered radio beside the officer and the deep wound in his abdomen. Thor let out a low growl, the fur on his neck bristling, as if sensing a danger that still lingered nearby. "He's breathing," Clara exclaimed, feeling a faint pulse beneath her fingertips when she touched the man's neck. Without hesitating, she tore off her own red scarf, folded it, and pressed it hard against the wound. The fabric was instantly soaked with warm blood that trickled through her trembling fingers. Helena, paralyzed for a moment, finally snapped into action. She pulled the old, shared cell phone from her pocket and tried to call for emergency services. The screen showed only a single, flickering bar of signal. "It's not working!" she cried in desperation, pacing in circles. "I'm going to try higher up." As Helena raced to find a signal, Clara maintained pressure on the wound, her heart pounding against her ribs. Officer Rocha's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. "We're getting help." Every second felt like an eternity. The wind whispered through the leaves. Thor stood a vigilant guard, and Clara knew that this man's life now depended on them. Two 10-year-old girls and a rescue dog, alone in the woods. They were the injured officer's only hope. With her heart racing, Helena Almeida scrambled through the trees of red leaf forest. Her small feet leaped over muddy puddles and deftly dodged treacherous roots that seemed determined to trip her. Thor kept pace beside her, his snout raised as if he could sniff out the cell signal they so desperately needed. "Just a little further," the girl muttered to herself, clutching the old phone in her trembling hand. When she finally reached a small clearing where the canopy opened to the sky, Helena stopped, breathless. She held the phone as high as she could, turning slowly, until a faint beep cut through the silence of the forest. "Emergency, please," she shouted the moment the call connected. Her childish voice sounded strangely adult as she described with perfect clarity where they had found the injured officer. "It's Officer André Rocha. He's bleeding badly. We're on the North Trail, near the old well." Meanwhile, just a few yards away, Clara remained crouched beside the wounded man. Her small fingers held the officer's hand tightly, feeling the weak pulse beneath his pale skin. The scarf, now completely saturated with blood, seemed to be doing little to stop the bleeding. "Help is on the way," Clara whispered, unsure if André could even hear her. "My sister went to call for help. You're going to be okay." Her words were like a prayer, uttered as Thor returned to take up a watchful position beside them, a furry guardian. When the first distant wail of sirens reached the twins' ears, it didn't bring the relief they expected. Instead, a new fear took hold. What if they were too late? Clara looked at the officer's pale face, at the blood staining her own small hands, and felt the weight of responsibility as never before. Helena came running back, sliding down the last slope. "They're coming!" she announced, out of breath, kneeling beside her sister. They looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them as they held the officer's hand together. The sirens grew louder, and flashing lights began to strobe between the trees. It was in that moment, as the late afternoon sun filtered through the red maple leaves, that the girls understood something fundamental. Even though they were small, their actions could change a person's destiny. They weren't just two children lost in the woods with their dog. For André Rocha, they were the difference between life and death. In the days that followed, Maple Valley was transformed. The rescue of the officer in Red Leaf Forest became the main topic of conversation on every street corner, in every market, and at every church door. The Forest Rescue Girls was how everyone referred to the Almeida twins, with a mixture of pride and admiration rarely seen in the small town. At the municipal school, Principal Sonia Morera organized a special assembly in the central courtyard. Children from every class gathered, whispering and pointing at Clara and Helena, who stood with their heads bowed, unaccustomed to so much attention. The principal, usually so formal, surprised everyone when her voice cracked with emotion as she spoke of courage and responsibility. "These girls teach us that heroism has no age or size," Sonia declared, as she presented certificates of honor to the sisters. Thor, lying at the twins' feet, received a colorful paper medal crafted by the third-grade class. The German shepherd seemed to understand the gravity of the moment, remaining unusually still throughout the ceremony. Clara spent hours poring over her red-leaf mystery notebook, sketching every detail of that morning with impressive precision. The red maple tree, the bloodstains on André Rocha's uniform, even the exact shape of the broken radio. Her fingers still trembled slightly when she recalled the feeling of the warm blood on her scarf. Helena, meanwhile, found comfort in the stories her grandmother used to tell about the forest's guardian spirits. "It wasn't a coincidence," she would whisper to her sister at night. "Grandma always said that red leaf guides those with a pure heart." She firmly believed that something greater had led Thor to the injured officer. Their mother, Lucia, watched her daughters with a mix of pride and concern. Between shifts at the bakery, she noticed how the girls were maturing right before her eyes. Sometimes, she would find herself staring out the window toward the forest, imagining how differently everything could have turned out. Autumn painted Maple Valley in hues of gold and crimson, and something new seemed to be sprouting among the residents. Neighbors who barely exchanged greetings now stopped to chat. The local store displayed a handmade sign, "Pride of our town." Even the notoriously grumpy old grocer offered the twins free candy whenever they passed by. That peculiar autumn, courage and solidarity bloomed even in the driest soil of Maple Valley, as if the girls' actions had planted invisible seeds of hope everywhere. Lucia Almeida rubbed her work-worn hands together as she stared at the bakery's broken oven. It was another morning she would have to improvise. Last month's rent was still overdue, and the landlord had already left 3 messages on her answering machine. She sighed, the weight of responsibility a heavy cloak on her tired shoulders. Through the kitchen window, the sweet scent of maple syrup drifted in on the breeze from the forest. The aroma, once comforting, now seemed to mock her broken dreams. For 3 years straight, Lucia had planned to enter the Maple Festival with her famous apple muffins, a recipe inherited from her grandmother. 3 years of plans cut short by some financial emergency or household crisis. Maybe next autumn, she murmured to herself, trying to light the old stovetop to make the twins' breakfast. Since the rescue in the forest, however, small changes had begun to ripple through her life. On Monday, a box of groceries appeared on her back porch. There was no note, just basic goods arranged neatly inside. On Wednesday, a brand new oven repair tool was leaning against the bakery door when Lucia arrived to try and reopen. The single mother hesitated to accept these anonymous gifts. Her pride battled with practical need. But when Clara and Helena excitedly told her about a discreet sign they saw in Mr. Joaquim's grocery store, she couldn't hold back her tears. Heroin muffins. Every penny helps. The handwritten sign read, a small donation box placed beside it. It already contained a few small bills and a handful of coins. That afternoon, while picking up the girls from school, 3 neighbors stopped her to ask when the bakery would reopen. An elderly woman squeezed her hand and whispered, I miss your cinnamon bread, child. When you start baking again, save 2 for me. Lucia realized that Maple Valley had its own way of caring for its own. It wasn't charity. It was a silent promise of support, an invisible safety net woven without fanfare, respecting the dignity of the one receiving. As she watched Clara and Helena playing with Thor in the yard, the baker felt a new kind of hope take root. Perhaps with a little more effort and the quiet support of her community, the dream of the Maple Festival could still come true. And more importantly, perhaps her daughters could grow up knowing that courage and kindness, like they had shown in the forest, always find an echo in the hearts of others. In Maple Valley, time seemed to move at 2 speeds, the rush of the present and the slow persistence of the past, which lingered on every corner. On Saturdays, the church choir rehearsed under the direction of Mrs. Cardoso, their voices echoing hymns that had spanned generations. Lucia Almeida had left her patchwork quilt unfinished at the last town fair, promising to complete it for a charity auction that never happened. On cold nights, the town elders gathered in the central square to tell stories that made children look twice at the shadows of red leaf forest. Clara held Helena's hand tightly as she stared at the entrance to the old well trail. The narrow path disappeared between gnarled trees, and she felt a familiar shiver. Do you remember what Grandma used to say about this place? Helena asked, adjusting her backpack. Clara nodded, recalling her grandmother's words about guardian spirits who guided the lost back home. She said, if you ever feel watched in the forest, you shouldn't feel fear, but gratitude. Thor, ever vigilant, sniffed the damp morning air. The German shepherd, still recovering from a recent injury, limped slightly as he padded down the path. Suddenly, he stopped, his ears erect. With a low bark, he veered off the main trail, pushing through dense bushes. Thor, come back! Clara called. But the dog kept going, as if answering a summons only he could hear. The twins glanced at each other for a moment before following him. The vegetation grew thicker, branches scratching their arms as they pressed onward. After a few minutes, They reached a hidden clearing where Thor was sniffing the ground insistently. "Look at this," Helena whispered, pointing to deep ruts in the damp soil. Clara knelt, running her fingers over the tracks left by heavy tires. Nearby, broken branches and torn tree bark signaled recent activity. She quickly pulled her red-leaf mystery notebook from her bag and began to sketch the tire pattern with precision. "Do you think this has to do with what happened to Officer André?" Helena asked, picking up a piece of black plastic half buried in the mud. Thor barked again, more agitated now, circling a tree stump. The girls moved closer and saw fresh cut marks, the sap still sticky. "Police Chief Paula needs to see this," Clara decided, taking a photo with the old cell phone. The forest, which had always been the twins' playground, was now revealing a darker face. As they made their way back to the main trail, Thor remained on high alert, as if he sensed that Red Leaf Forest held secrets far more dangerous than any of the old legends had ever suggested. The school gymnasium was festooned with colorful ribbons and dried leaves for the traditional harvest ball. Elena Almeida was adjusting the sash in her hair when she spotted them in the dimmest corner of the hall. Police Chief Paula Duarte and Mayor Antonio Mendez, deep in conversation. It wasn't their presence that caught her attention, but the palpable tension on their usually composed faces. "We can't keep ignoring this," Elena heard the chief say, her voice low but firm. The mayor ran a hand through his graying hair, a gesture Elena recognized from his nervous town square speeches. 20 years, Paula. 20 years of keeping things running," he answered, leaning closer. "I won't let 2 kids and a dog dig up what we buried." A chill ran down Elena's spine. She bent down, pretending to tie her shoelace, trying to hear more. But just then, Sonia Morera clapped her hands, announcing the lantern dance, and the conversation was lost in the swell of music. Elena rushed to tell her sister, but Clara was busy serving punch with the student council. The following Tuesday, while helping her mother, Lucia, organize old boxes in the bakery's pantry, Clara found a yellowed envelope. Inside, a faded photograph showed the grand opening of the family bakery, with the girl's grandmother cutting a red ribbon. In the background of the image, a young woman was smiling, unmistakably Paula Duarte's mother. "Mom, did Grandma know the chief's mother?" Clara asked, holding out the photo. Lucia took the picture gently, her eyes softening for a moment. "Mariana Duarte was our best customer. She came for bread every day before—" her voice trailed off. "Before the accident at the mill." 3 days later, the chief appeared at the bakery. Like her other recent visits, she claimed she was just checking on the oven, an excuse no one openly questioned. Thor, lying near the counter, lifted his head when the officer entered, but didn't bark as he did with other strangers. Clara watched intently as Paula surveyed the shop, her eyes lingering on the old photos on the wall. The girl noticed how the chief would discreetly touch a locket at her neck whenever she glanced at Lucia. There was something about these frequent visits that went far beyond official concern. An old bond, perhaps, or an unpaid debt, a shared secret. "The oven's working perfectly," Elena commented, giving her sister a meaningful look. "Yes," Paula Duarte replied, adjusting her uniform belt. "But sometimes, what looks whole on the outside is hiding cracks within, isn't it?" The hospital room was silent save for the steady beeping of monitors when Clara and Elena Almeida were finally able to visit André Rocha. The officer, still pale, had the distant gaze of someone carrying a weight greater than his own physical pain. Thor, who had been granted exceptional permission to enter at Chief Duarte's insistence, lay quietly beside the bed. "What happened that morning in the forest? It wasn't an accident," André confessed. his weak voice a stark contrast to the gravity of his words. "I was investigating an illegal logging scheme at the old mill." The twins exchanged a stunned look. The abandoned mill, with its great water wheels and stone walls, was a historic landmark in Maple Valley. Clara clutched her notebook to her chest as Helena moved closer to the bed. "I found evidence that they're harvesting precious timber from the red leaf forest and using the mill as a front to process and ship it illegally," the officer continued, shifting uncomfortably against his pillows. "When I realized the scale of the operation, someone saw me and, well, you know the rest." The news spread through the town like wildfire. At Lucia Almeida's bakery, customers whispered theories while waiting in line. The name of Augusto Mendez, an influential lumberman and sponsor of the last Maple Festival, began to circulate in veiled accusations. "Mom says he always donated to the school," Helena commented to Clara as they walked home. "How can someone who helps so much do something so terrible?" Doubt hung over Maple Valley like a dense fog. At night, lights burned in the town hall long after hours. From their kitchen window, the girls watched the silhouettes of council members slipping in through side doors. The entire town seemed to be holding its breath. "This goes beyond logging," Paula Duarte explained when she visited the bakery the next day, speaking softly as Lucia served her coffee. "André found documents linking important people in this town to environmental crimes that have been going on for years." Lying near the counter, Thor's ears perked up, as if he understood the gravity of the situation. The dog seemed to sense the growing tension that was gripping the small community. "If this all comes out," the chief continued, "many reputations, built over decades, could crumble overnight." That week, the silence on the streets of Maple Valley spoke louder than any rumor. Old friends avoided each other in the market aisles, and the once open town council meetings were now held behind closed doors. The truth, like an old wound, was beginning to fester. 6 months after the incident in the forest, Clara and Helena Almeida could no longer stand the suspense. While the adults seemed to be stalling the investigation, the twins decided to take matters into their own hands. Clara opened her notebook, now titled The Red Leaf Mystery, and filled with meticulous notes, newspaper clippings, and a hand-drawn map of the forest marked with red ink. "We have to go back to the exact spot," Helena whispered, watching from the kitchen window as her mother kneaded dough. Thor, now fully recovered, raised his ears as if he understood every word. On a cloudy morning, the girls followed the German shepherd along the trail leading to the old well. The dog seemed to possess a sixth sense, sniffing the path with determination. Suddenly, Thor began to bark frantically near an area covered by tall shrubs. Clara carefully pushed the branches aside and felt her heart pound. 3 rusted barrels were partially buried in the earth, bearing the faded symbols of chemical hazards. "Look at this," Helena called, pointing to tire tracks that led toward the old mill. The twins photographed everything with an old cell phone and jotted down every detail in the notebook. That same afternoon, as Lucia prepared a new batch of bread, a metallic clink caught her attention. While sifting flour, her fingers brushed against something hard. A gleaming bullet fragment, mixed in with the ingredients. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a warning. "Someone's been here," she murmured to herself, glancing nervously at the back door that led to the yard. But her initial fear soon hardened into a quiet rage. After sacrificing so much to keep a roof over her daughters' heads, Lucia would not let threats make her back down. The next morning, to the twins' surprise, their mother announced she was reopening her old pastry stall in the town square. "If they want to intimidate us, "We'll show them we're not afraid," she said, arranging scones and apple turnovers in a basket. The simple stall, covered by a faded awning, became an act of defiance. Every sale was a small victory against fear. The girls kept the bullet fragment in a small box, another piece of the puzzle they vowed to solve. All the while, Thor remained ever alert, as if he knew that danger still stalked the Almeida family. The sky over Maple Valley was heavy with dark clouds when Thor collapsed in the Almeida's yard. Clara was the first to see the German shepherd's trembling body, blood seeping from a deep wound in the very same flank that already bore a scar from his days as an abandoned puppy. Helena screamed for help as Lucia ran from the kitchen, her hands still dusted with flour. At the veterinary clinic, the sharp scent of antiseptic mingled with the anxiety in the air. The twins watched helplessly as the medical team rushed back and forth. The vet, his expression grim, explained that Thor needed a delicate and expensive surgery, words that made Lucia's heart ache, thinking of the bills already piled high on her kitchen table. "How much time do we have?" Clara asked, squeezing her sister's hand tightly. "3 days, at most," the doctor replied, adjusting the IV drip in the unconscious animal's leg. On the way home, Elena's silent tears contrasted with the growing resolve in Clara's eyes. While poring over first aid books from the school library, Clara sketched out plans in her red-leaf mystery notebook, which had now become the headquarters for Operation Save Thor. Elena, meanwhile, found her own way to fight back. With the help of the principal, Sonia, she organized an emergency bake sale at the weekend craft fair. Lucia, though exhausted, spent the night baking whatever their donated ingredients would allow. Each batch was a silent prayer for the animal, who had become a vital part of their family. On the morning of the fair, the biting cold didn't stop people from gathering around the small, improvised stall. "Help the four-legged hero of Maple Valley," read the sign Clara had made. André Rocha was one of the first to arrive, limping slightly but with determination in his eyes. The officer bought half the pastries in one go and distributed them among his colleagues at the station. "Without him, I might not be here," André said, tucking a few extra bills into the donation box. Chief Duarte arrived soon after, bringing hot coffee for the girls and some news. The police department had organized a flash raffle among the town's public employees. Every slice sold, every coin dropped into the decorated box, was an act of defiance against the despair that threatened to swallow the twins. At the end of the day, with their fingers numb from the cold and their hearts warmed by the solidarity, Clara and Elena counted the collected money, knowing that Thor, just like them, was a fighter who would not give up easily. The twins' Heroin Muffins campaign transformed Maple Valley in a surprising way. The small, improvised table at the craft fair quickly became a gathering point for everyone who wanted to help Thor. Mrs. Francisca from the grocery store brought flour and sugar. Mr. Oliveira, who had never bought a single sweet from the bakery, showed up with a handful of coins wrapped in paper. Even school children came to offer their savings, emptied from glass jars. Clara organized the sales with the same focus she used to jot down clues in her notebook. Elena told stories about Thor to anyone who would listen, turning the German shepherd into a local legend who rivaled the protective spirits of the forest. The animal, lying in the veterinary clinic, fought for his life while his name echoed through the town. "I never thought a dog could bring so many people together," Chief Paula remarked as she left a $20 bill in the donation box. She watched as the community, once divided by recent scandals, now rallied around a common cause. At the bakery, Lucia worked tirelessly. Her hands, already calloused from daily labor, now prepared double batches. Every penny earned went into a can decorated with a photo of Thor, kept beside the newly repaired oven. The smell of fresh bread once again perfumed the street, mingling with anxiety for the future. The nights were the hardest. After the girls were asleep, the baker would sit at the kitchen table, calculating expenses and adding up donations. The numbers never seemed to be enough. The bank still sent collection notices, the rent was still late, and the vet bills grew by the day. Lucia was learning that every victory had its price, whether it was accumulated debt, sleepless nights, or the emotional scars she carried alone. Even so, something had changed. Old customers returned, bringing not only money, but also stories and smiles. The flame of the bakery was rekindling, and with it, the hope in the Almeida family's hearts. When André Rocha appeared, still limping and leaning on a cane to buy an entire batch of muffins, Lucia couldn't hold back her tears. The officer, who owed his life to the girls, was now helping to save Thor, completing a circle of solidarity that seemed to be the true strength of their small town. The first spring flowers were beginning to bloom in Maple Valley when Paula Duarte knocked on the Almeidas' door. Her expression carried the weight of a long-buried truth. Lucia received the chief in the bakery's kitchen, where the aroma of fresh bread failed to mask the tension in the air. "I found something you need to hear," Paula said, placing an old audio device on the table. The crackling recordings revealed the voice of a man in a panic. André Rocha's father, who had disappeared 20 years earlier while on patrol in the Red Leaf Forest. Lucia turned pale as she recognized the sound of the radio in the recordings. It was identical to the one found smashed to pieces next to the officer's wounded body on that fateful morning. "It's not a coincidence," the chief explained, running a hand nervously through her hair. "The son followed in his father's footsteps and stumbled upon the very same secret." The twins, listening from behind the door, exchanged a look of astonishment. Clara clutched her notebook to her chest, while Helena held Thor by the collar, keeping him from giving them away. The next day, an extraordinary meeting at the station laid bare what many had feared. Sergeant Luis Correa, a man who for decades had personified honesty in Maple Valley, was at the center of the conspiracy. Cornered by the evidence, the veteran confessed in a choked voice that he had helped cover up the disappearance to protect the town's reputation. "We thought it was better to leave some truths buried," the sergeant admitted, as André watched with a mixture of rage and pain. It had been his father who first discovered signs of the illegal logging scheme, which at the time seemed like a minor illicit business. Luis's confession shattered every pillar of the local old guard. Families who had lived side by side for generations now eyed each other with suspicion. The mayor canceled public appearances, and a heavy silence fell over the town square, where old men once played dominoes without a care in the world. For Lucia, who had always fought her battles alone, the revelation was yet another burden. As she kneaded the dough for the next day's bread, silent tears fell upon the flour. Her daughters had awakened a slumbering truth, and now the entire town would have to face its own shadows. Thor, sensing the sadness in the house, lay down at his owner's feet, as if to say that even when the world was falling apart, some loyalties remained unshakable. The biting cold that gripped Maple Valley seemed to conspire against Lucia Almeida. That morning, she found the main pipe to the Krusty Crumbs bakery frosted over, a thin layer of ice forming on its outer surface, a clear sign it could burst at any moment. With fingers trembling from the cold, the baker tried to warm the metal while mentally calculating the cost of an emergency plumber. As if that weren't enough, the letter from the bank arrived the same day, its final warning highlighted in red letters. 3 overdue payments, 15 days to settle the debt or face eviction. Lucia sank into a chair in her small industrial kitchen, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. The once comforting aroma of cinnamon bread now seemed to mock her efforts. "Mom, we made new posters for the apple muffins," Clara announced, bursting in with colorful sheets of paper, oblivious to the tears her mother was holding back. Lucia quickly wiped her face and forced a smile, tucking the bank letter into the pocket of her flour-dusted apron. She wouldn't let her daughters carry this burden, too. The twins had already faced more danger than anyone their age ever should. That afternoon, as she wrestled with a stubborn batch of dough, the shop bell chimed. It was Sonia Morera, the school principal, accompanied by 3 teachers. "We've come to place a special order for the parent-teacher meeting," the principal announced, placing an envelope on the counter. "This is an advance." The envelope contained far more than the fair price for the pastries. Lucia knew it instantly, but Sonia's firm gaze stopped her from protesting. In the days that followed, the phenomenon repeated itself. The butcher appeared, offering meat for her pies in exchange for a week's worth of bread. The grocer brought a surplus of flour that needed to be used. Even Sergeant Luis Correa, despite his controversial involvement, discreetly left an envelope with cash for future orders from the police station. Solidarity came in many forms. Promissory notes signed by neighbors, small orders paid for in advance, and even temporary jobs offered to the twins to help at parties and events. Thor, lying in a corner of the bakery, watched it all with attentive eyes, as if standing guard against the despair that threatened to invade their space. Every batch that came out of the oven was a small victory against time and circumstance. Lucia worked tirelessly, often late into the night, her hands chapped from the cold and the constant work. A sense of dread never quite left the kitchen. It was an invisible presence hovering over the trays of bread and cakes. But with every customer who walked in, with every grateful smile, Lucia felt that maybe, just maybe, they would survive this storm too. The Maple Festival transformed the central square into a mosaic of autumnal colors. Clara Almeida adjusted the mystery of the ruby leaf notebook inside her backpack, while Helena checked that Thor was well hidden behind the craft stalls. The twins had spent weeks planning this moment with Detective Paula Duarte. "Remember, you just observe and signal," Paula instructed, adjusting the radio on her belt. "No heroics today." Clara nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility. Her meticulous notes on schedules, suspicious meetings, and vehicle markings had become a detailed map of the illegal operation. Helena, meanwhile, knew every shortcut and hiding place in the surrounding forest, like the back of her hand. The plan was simple. During the traditional first sap tapping ceremony, when all eyes were elsewhere, the loggers' accomplices would show up for a document exchange. Thor, trained to recognize the specific scent of the rusted barrels they used, would be the first to alert them. When the German shepherd let out a low growl, the girls exchanged a look. A man in a gray suit was walking briskly toward the makeshift parking lot. It was Renato Meireles, the mayor's campaign treasurer, carrying a brown briefcase. Clara gave the prearranged signal, and Helena sent a text message. Within seconds, Paula and André Rocha emerged from strategic points, as other officers blocked the exits. The bust was swift and precise. The briefcase contained not only forged documents for transporting illegal timber, but also receipts for suspicious deposits into the election campaign's account. The scheme was larger and more complex than they had imagined. The money from the devastation was funding local politics. The next morning, the regional newspaper's headline blared, "Heroic Twins Uncover Corruption Scheme in Maple Valley." The photos of the girls, taken without permission, exposed their faces to the entire region. The privacy Lucia had fought so hard to preserve crumbled in a matter of hours. Reporters began to circle the bakery. Schoolmates pointed and whispered in the hallways. Thor, sensitive to the growing stress, stopped eating, and his old wounds began to ache again. It wasn't supposed to be like this, Helena lamented, stroking the dog's fur as they waited in the vet's office. We wanted to help, not become the news. Clara snapped her notebook shut. We did the right thing, but at what cost? While the town celebrated the exposure of the scheme, the Almeida family faced a new battle, protecting themselves from the whirlwind of unwanted attention and caring for Thor, who was once again paying the price for his protector's courage. As the snow melted from the rooftops of Maple Valley, forming small streams that trickled down the sidewalks, the first spring flowers began to emerge shyly from the remnants of ice, bringing an air of renewal the town desperately needed. It was against this backdrop of transition that the final truth emerged, shaking the small community to its core. Marcos Oliveira, the lumberman everyone had pegged as the villain, appeared at the police station with his lawyer. Detective Paula Duarte received them with suspicion, but what she heard over the next 2 hours completely changed the course of the investigation. The local businessman was merely a middleman, a pawn in a much larger game. I never had a choice, Marcos confessed, handing over documents that revealed threats and blackmail from a corporate consortium in the capital. The group, led by a former senator, had set up an operation to illegally exploit the region's valuable timber, using Maple Valley's economic fragility after the mill's closure as their entry point. Clara and Helena followed the developments through whispers in the bakery. Their mother tried to shield them from the gravity of the situation, but it was impossible to hide the impact of the revelations. Thor, now recovered, seemed to sense the tension in the air, always remaining alert by the girl's side. André Rocha, still leaning on a cane, reviewed old notes and realized how thoroughly he had been deceived. The plan had been perfect. The consortium had promised to reactivate the mill, create jobs, and restore prosperity to the region, all while secretly plundering the ruby leaf forest. At a hastily convened town meeting, the church hall overflowed with anxious residents. A downcast Sergeant Luis Correa admitted to having ignored earlier reports in the name of promised progress. The mayor, cornered by evidence, tried to distance himself from the scheme, but his signature on incriminating documents spoke louder than his denials. They sold us dreams while they stole our future, an elderly woman said, rising from the crowd. The damage was done. Lifelong friendships dissolved into bitter accusations. Families who had lived in harmony now barely greeted each other on the street. Faith in the town's economic recovery had given way to a painful cynicism. As they walked home after the meeting, Lucia wrapped her arms around her daughters beneath the starry sky. Sometimes, she murmured, we have to lose something to understand its true value. She looked toward the trees rising majestically in the distance, survivors of a silent battle that had finally come to an end. Clara stared at her bedroom ceiling, the events of the past few weeks weighing on her like a damp blanket. Moonlight filtered through the faded curtain, illuminating the mystery of the ruby leaf notebook lying open beside her, filled with notes on the loggers and their ties to the mayor. Her heart was torn between the instinct to protect Helena and a burning desire to see justice done. In the next bed, her twin sister slept fitfully, murmuring about forest spirits and talking trees. Helena had always found refuge in local legends, but now those same stories felt hollow against the real-world cruelty they had uncovered. By day, she wore the hopeful smile everyone knew, but at night, her nightmares revealed the truth. Thor, lying on the rug between their beds, lifted his head as Clara sighed. The German shepherd still limped from his recent injury, but his watchful eyes never left the girls. Clara reached out to stroke his head, feeling the fresh scar beneath his fur. "We're doing the right thing, aren't we, Thor?" she whispered, receiving a gentle lick in reply. Downstairs in the kitchen, Lucia washed baking pans, trying not to make a sound. She had noticed the dark circles under her daughter's eyes, the hushed whispers they exchanged when they thought she wasn't listening. Her maternal instinct was to shield them from all danger, but she also recognized the determination growing inside them, the same resolve that kept her on her feet after so many sleepless nights. The next day, when Detective Paula showed up at Krusty Krum's bakery with new documents, Clara knew there was no turning back. Helena squeezed her hand under the table, a silent gesture that said more than 1,000 words. The twins had crossed an invisible threshold, where the innocence of childhood met the responsibility of doing what was right. "You don't have to continue," Paula said, her gaze heavy with concern. "Yes, we do," Clara replied, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Helena nodded, adding quietly, "The forest trusted us." Thor, lying at their feet, rose as if he understood every word. Though wounded, he remained vigilant, a living symbol of the resistance that inspired them. The animal they had rescued years ago was now the one rescuing them from fear, day after day. As the sun set over Maple Valley, 3 silhouettes, 2 girls and a dog, walked the old well path. Courage wasn't the absence of fear, they were learning, but the decision to move forward in spite of it. And that spring, they discovered that courage was something that grew with every step they took together. The morning of the grand reopening arrived under a clear sky that seemed to bless Lucia Almeida's efforts. After sleepless nights, impossible calculations, and tears hidden from her daughters, she was finally hanging the new signs for the Krusty Krum's bakery. The striped maple-red awnings fluttered gently in the spring breeze, like banners from a battle she had refused to lose. The aroma of cinnamon rolls and apple muffins escaped through the freshly painted windows, winding its way across the square and drawing curious glances. Lucia straightened her floral apron, a last-minute gift from the twins, and took a deep breath before unlocking the door. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from an emotion she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The first customers arrived timidly. Mrs. Margarita, who always bought her bread on Tuesdays, was the first through the door, followed by the mailman and 2 teachers from the school. Each chime of the bell was a small victory that made Lucia's heart race. She served each person with a genuine smile, even as their carefully counted coins spoke of the hard times everyone was facing. Clara appeared mid-morning, breathless after helping organize the school library. She watched proudly as her mother served customers with an easy grace, as if the months of closed doors had never happened. Helena arrived soon after, leading Thor on a new leash, a gift from Detective Paula. The dog, his scars still visible, settled obediently in his designated corner, where he could watch the comings and goings without bothering anyone. "We've sold almost everything from the first batch," Lucia whispered to her daughters as she prepared more dough. She didn't mention that the profit would barely cover the ingredients, let alone the overdue loan payments. Some battles were hers to fight alone. In the afternoon, the stream of customers slowed but never entirely stopped. André Rocha appeared, limping slightly, accompanied by 2 fellow officers. He ordered a half-dozen loaves and insisted on paying double, disguising his generosity as an early delivery fee. As the sun began to set, Lucia sat down for the first time that day. Her back ached, her feet begged for rest, but her heart was lighter. The nearly empty shelves meant that, for today at least, there would be food on the table and a few bills paid. It was a modest new beginning, but each customer won, each successful batch of bread, was a small victory against despair. The scars, the visible ones on Thor, and the invisible ones on each member of her family, were slowly beginning to transform into marks of resilience, no longer of pain. André Rocha returned to work with a makeshift cane and a renewed sense of purpose. Though the injury had left a permanent scar on his leg, the officer transformed his experience into something greater than himself. The Little Saviors program was born from a casual conversation at the station, when he realized how many children didn't know how to react in an emergency. On Wednesday afternoons, the courtyard of the school run by Sonia Moreira filled with eager voices. André taught basic first aid techniques using colorful mannequins. Pressure on the wound, just like Clara did for me, he would explain, demonstrating the motion. The children watched him with admiration, especially when he showed them his scar, as living proof that small gestures can save lives. Clara and Helena became his natural assistants. Clara, the elder by 5 minutes, as she always made a point of reminding everyone, would bring her notebook to show her drawings of rescue techniques. Helena, in turn, would tell stories of how courage can appear in the most unexpected moments, even when fear seems paralyzing. At the station, Police Chief Paula Duarte had finally made peace with her past. After years of guarding the secrets of the town that had watched her grow up, she decided that mentorship was a form of redemption. On Fridays, she would host the twins for conversations about justice and responsibility. Doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it, she would say, sharing carefully edited stories of solved cases. The bond between the officer and the girls deepened when Paula revealed she had known their mother in her youth. Lucia, between batches of dough at the revitalized bakery, would smile seeing the friendship blossom, as if a cycle was being completed through her daughters. The ceremony for Thor was held on a sunny Sunday. The German shepherd, still with a slight limp on his right side, received an official civilian canine medal from the mayor, who was trying to rebuild his own image after the recent scandal. The dog, sensing the gravity of the moment, stood perfectly still during the award, only to later run and lie down beneath the town square's oak tree, as if it were his natural throne. "Heroes come in all sizes," André said during his speech, looking first at the twins and then at Thor. "Some have 4 paws, others are only 10 years old, but they all share the same brave heart." In a small display case at the Val dos Bordos police station, Clara Almeida's scarf rested inside a glass box, still bearing the dark stains of André Rocha's blood. Beside it, the shattered police radio, painstakingly recovered piece by piece by the forensics team, told a silent story of courage and truth. Chief Paula Duarte had insisted on the exhibit, even against the opinions of some of the more conservative council members. "Some call it coincidence. I call it fate," Paula murmured, as she adjusted the plaque, explaining the scarf's significance. She knew that simple piece of fabric had changed not only André's life, but the entire course of the town. At the Crumbs and Crusts bakery, Lucia admired the freshly painted walls. Among the decorative frames was a clipped article from the local paper, with a headline about the heroines of the forest. The baker smiled discreetly whenever a new customer came in, asking if those were indeed the famous twins. The town fairs, once mere social events, had transformed into true community support centers. Dona Josefa, the town's oldest seamstress, began hiding small notes of encouragement in the quilts she made for the charity bazaar. For the Almeida family, with love, read one, stitched in red thread. Thor, now fully recovered, slept peacefully under the kitchen table as Helena counted coins from the tip jar. Each cent represented not just money, but the renewed trust of their neighbors. The German shepherd would occasionally lift his head, as if still on alert, ever ready to protect his girls. At the veterinary clinic, Dr. Marcello had framed the X-ray of Thor's leg as an example of medical miracle and sheer determination. Whenever the twins stopped by, he made a point of showing it to other clients, explaining how willpower could overcome the most pessimistic prognoses. The journey had been far from easy. Clara still woke with a start some nights, remembering the blood on her small hands. Lucia faced her bills with the same courage she used on a stubborn batch of dough. And André Rocha, despite his limp, made a point of personally patrolling the ruby leaf forest every week. In Valle dos Bordos, every gesture of kindness, every extended hand, every shared loaf of bread had become part of an invisible web of protection. Sergeant Luis Correa, after his confession, found his own redemption by helping with renovations at the bakery on Sundays. When the first perfect scone emerged from the new oven, Lucia wept. It wasn't just a pastry, it was a symbol that even in the smallest of towns, truth and goodness always find their way, no matter how winding the path. At the last solstice, Valle dos Bordos was transformed into a scene of celebration. The traditional Maple Festival, once just another event on the town calendar, now carried a much deeper meaning. Colorful banners swayed between the trees in the central square, while the sweet aroma of Lucia Almeida's apple cakes filled the air. Lucia, in a new apron, with her hair in a messy bun, handed out generous slices of bread and genuine smiles. Her hands, still marked by hard work, no longer trembled with fear or uncertainty. The baker finally felt she had turned the most difficult page in her family's story. "This is the best scone I've ever tasted," commented Sergeant Luis, who, after confessing his role in the old case, was seeking redemption through small gestures. Lucia gave him a slight nod, knowing that forgiveness, like good dough, needs time to rise. At the edge of the square, Clara and Helena ran with Thor, who proudly displayed his civilian medal. The fully recovered German shepherd barked joyfully as younger children asked to pet him. The twins, now known on every corner of the town, had become a symbol of hope. "Look who's here," Helena whispered, seeing André Rocha approach. The officer, leaning on a handcrafted cane, walked slowly toward the stage set up for the speeches. His impeccable uniform contrasted with the visible scar on his face, a permanent reminder of that morning in the ruby leaf forest. Chief Paula Duarte watched from a distance, her eyes misty. After years of guarding secrets that had suffocated the town, she could finally breathe the clean air of truth. When her gaze met Lucia's, they shared a knowing nod that needed no words. The square, which months ago had buzzed with whispers of suspicion and fear, now pulsed with music and laughter. Families spread blankets under the trees. Elders told stories to the young, and even the merchants who had lost business in the logging scandal were finding new ways to rebuild. "They changed everything, didn't they?" Sonia Morera remarked to a group of teachers, watching the twins from afar. The school principal had witnessed how Clara and Helena's example had inspired other students to get involved in community projects. Even the most cynical, Those who had doubted that two 10-year-old girls could make a difference now whispered their names with respect. Valle dos Bordos had learned that courage can spring from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes it is the smallest hands that carry the greatest change. The Almeida's porch was bathed in the golden light of dusk, creating an almost magical halo around the house. Clara and Helena sat on the worn steps, with Thor nestled comfortably between them, his warm fur a comfort against their legs. The German shepherd, now proudly wearing his civilian canine medal, breathed peacefully, the scars almost invisible beneath his renewed coat. Clara closed her notebook, The Mystery of the Ruby Leaf, running her fingers over the worn cover. Its once empty pages now overflowed with notes, drawings, newspaper clippings, and small mementos, a silent testimony to a journey no one could have foreseen. She felt the weight of those months on her shoulders. But it was a different kind of weight now, as if each challenge had forged something stronger within her. "I think we need a new notebook," Helena whispered, stroking Thor's ears. Her eyes, ever the dreamer's, reflected the orange light of the setting sun. "This one is too full of stories." Lucia appeared at the door, her hands still dusted with flour, the crumbs and crusts apron tied around her waist. Exhaustion still lined her face, but there was something new there, too, a spark that not even sleepless nights could extinguish. She watched her daughters for a moment, absorbing the scene as one would a precious treasure. Helena stood and retrieved a still warm scone from the basket she'd brought from the bakery. She handed it to her mother with a smile, a simple gesture that carried the weight of all the battles they had won together. Lucia accepted the small bread, breaking it in half to share. "Look," Clara pointed toward the street. Across the way, André Rocha was walking slowly beside Paula Duarte. The officer still had a slight limp, but his confident posture had returned. The chief, for her part, seemed to have shed the burden of the secrets she had carried for so long. They both waved at the family on the porch. A gentle breeze drifted across the street, carrying the scent of maple trees and the distant smell of fresh bread. Thor lifted his snout, sniffing the air as if he could sense that something in Valle dos Bordos had fundamentally changed. "Well," Lucia said, sitting down beside her daughters, "you know there's still a lot of work to do. The mill, the forest, the people." "We know," Clara replied, sharing a knowing look with her sister. "But we're not alone anymore." The small family remained there, wrapped in the twilight, as the town lights began to flicker on, one by one. Valle dos Bordos was breathing easier now, thanks to small hands, a brave dog, and the choice renewed with every dawn to do what is right.